Good evening and welcome to The Report with me, John Rees. On tonight's programme, we'll be looking at the UK elections as the SNP released their election manifesto. And we'll also have a special interview with Dr Jamal Badawi. But first, more than 11,000 migrants were rescued in the Mediterranean Sea last week. They were the lucky ones. Close to 1,000 more lost their lives, the majority of them in the single worst incident to date. Afzal Ahmed looks at the cost of Fortress Europe.
An Italian patrol ship arrived in Malta today, carrying dozens of corpses recovered from one of the worst migrant boat disasters in the Mediterranean this year. A fishing boat said to be smuggling over 700 migrants on Saturday night capsized after the weight of the people on board tipped it over. This happened after the migrants saw a merchant ship in the distance and scrambled to attract its attention. 28 survivors have so far been rescued and will now receive treatment in the neighbouring Sicilian port of Catania. The disaster comes after more than 11,000 migrants were rescued and stopped in the past week alone, after warm weather prompted numerous voyages. The fresh deaths have put pressure on the European Union to address the issue, with EU foreign and interior ministers now meeting for emergency talks all this week. The EU's foreign policy chief says the bloc has a moral duty to tackle the migrant crisis.
Now, after what happened in the Mediterranean the night before the previous one, I felt it was our moral duty to concentrate also on our responsibility as Europeans to prevent this kind of tragedies to happen again and again. You might remember that just a month ago I was putting migration for the first time after 10 years on the agenda of foreign ministers, and we agreed on that occasion that we needed to have a joint ministerial, foreign ministers, interior ministers. I'm happy to say, if there is anything to be happy about it, that we are having this finally today.
Fresh calls have been made for the EU to reinstate full-scale search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean. Last October, the EU opted not to replace the Italian-run Operation Mare Nostrum, which saved about 100,000 lives last year. This came after fears that it was encouraging smugglers and migrants to organise more trips to Europe. The International Organization of Migration in Italy says the decision had a detrimental effect.
Last year we had the Mare Nostrum operation carried out by the Italian government, which monitored rescue operations over the entire sea. After its cancellation, we are only left with coast guards who are constantly risking their lives to conduct rescues. But there are so many distressed seagrams that they are simply unable to handle them all.
Only a smaller operation called Triton, run by the EU's Frontex agency, now operates, but its main role is border management. If the death toll of this latest disaster is confirmed, it will bring the total number of people seeking to reach Europe who've died this year to 1,500.
Joining me to discuss that story are Saira Grant, who's Legal and Policy Director of the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants. And on the line I've got Eva Moncure, who's spokesperson for the European Frontier Border Agency, Frontex. Saira, this is awful in human terms, but it's even more awful because it was predictable and predicted.
Absolutely. I mean, when Mare Nostrum stopped last year, at the end of last year, we have seen an increase in the loss of life on the shores of Europe.
And what did that mean, the ending of the Italian rescue operation, the Mare Nostrum?
Well, I mean, that was a very effective rescue operation. 150,000 lives were saved last year alone whilst that was operating. The stopping of that, it's been replaced by a much more scaled down operation, which is really just by the coastal waters, means that there is no search and rescue facility available anymore. The reason it was stopped was it was deemed to be a pull factor. It was costly and it was deemed to be a pull factor. What this shows, the number of migrants coming hasn't stopped. The deaths have increased, so the pull factor hypothesis has been completely misproven. And what we're seeing is these atrocities and tragedies on our shores.
Eva, let me bring you to the conversation. I mean, whatever was intended by that change of policy, it just hasn't worked, has it?
Well, I would like to, I heard what Sarah said, and I would like to clarify that Operation Triton, operation launched by Frontex, it's first of all not a replacement for a national operation, which was Operation Mare Nostrum. We are a border control agency, but more to the point, in our duty at sea, saving lives is always the first priority, and we have been actively participating in search and rescue since the beginning of operation, and actually have saved 1/3 of the migrants who were saved during that time. We're talking about over 8,000 people. And when search and rescue is declared and Frontex suspends all its activities and is at the disposal of the Italian search and rescue authorities and actively participates in search and rescue, and these search and rescue operations are not taking place near to the Italian shore, but are taking 40, 30 nautical miles of the Libyan shore. And that's where we go, and that's where migrants are saved, and unfortunately where tragedies happened as well.
But surely if as Eva's saying, it wasn't a replacement, surely there should have been a replacement.
Absolutely. And I mean, Eva knows herself, it's a much more scaled down operation. It's not the same thing at all. And that's why we are seeing these deaths occurring, because the same facilities aren't there. Operation Triton is far scaled down. And you're right. Why have we taken the step to stop the search and rescue? You know, look what the consequences of it are, and how can Europe just simply turn a blind eye to this tragedy? Let's not forget, we are seeing the highest refugee crisis since the Second World War. We're talking about 50 million displaced people, you know, and the bulk of them don't actually come to Europe. They're in neighbouring countries. 84% are taken by the developing countries around where there's conflict. But those who are seeking a sanctuary on Europe's shores are finding that they are taking risks, they are in unseaworthy vessels, you know, but desperate people are trying desperate measures to actually flee from terrible persecution, war, famine. You know, the atrocities are immense, and we have a global refugee crisis on our hands. We cannot simply turn our back on this.
I mean, Eva, I take what you said in your first contribution to the discussion, that you're doing what you can, but what you can do obviously isn't enough, and the European politicians seem to be admitting that now. What's going to change?
Well, obviously, as Saira said, we are facing an exceptionally difficult situation. The number of wars and conflicts in the neighborhood of Europe is growing. They are increasing, and there are new conflicts this year. And the solutions need to look at the comprehensive global measures that will include legal channels for those who should be able to come to Europe legally, and should also include measures in countries like Libya, which are now an El Dorado for people smugglers who we know are making thousands and thousands of euros and are abusing migrants. And they are the ones who are putting them on rubber pontoons and unseaworthy boats, overcrowded, and sending many to their death.
Saira, do you buy this? Because a lot of this is coming out of the politicians now, that it's all the people smugglers' fault. OK, nobody likes people smugglers, but they wouldn't be in business if the societies from which these people are coming, Syria, Libya, hadn't been destroyed, at least in part by Western intervention.
I mean, you're right that, you know, we can't just blame people smugglers, because that is one aspect of the problem. The main issue is that people want to flee where they are, and they're desperate to flee what is going on around them. So, you know, yes, we need to tackle people smugglers, and I agree with Eva that we do need to do a lot more. She is right in saying that, but that's the point. There is a complex political situation to resolve, but my point would be, in the meantime, because that is not an easy task, whilst that European countries are working on that, we need to reinstate what we had previously and a properly operational search and rescue, because we cannot simply sit back and allow these tragedies to take place.
I mean, Eva, the whole basis on which this policy decision was taken, that search and rescue in Mare Nostrum was a pull factor, I mean, that's an obvious nonsense. It was an obvious nonsense when the decision was taken, wasn't it? I mean, if you're 30% of these people are coming from Syria. If you're facing barrel bombs from the Assad regime, that's a far bigger push than whether or not you might be at risk at sea.
Well, you know, the Operation Mare Nostrum was launched literally several days after the tragedy in Lampedusa, when over 300 people died, and it was a humanitarian effort, and of course, it was a very important operation. I can speak on behalf of the agency of Frontex, and I can assure you that we have launched one of the largest operations we had in the history of the agency, and we are doing what we can, and we are doing search and rescue all the time. But there is also a limit to what an agency like Frontex can do. We don't have any assets on our own. We are deploying boats and planes that come from the member states. We have their support, but that there's a limit to what an agency like Frontex can do in such a complex and difficult situation.
I mean, sorry, I mean, I don't want to rehearse the argument because we've made the point that it would be better if there were more resources. But do you think that advantageous though that would be, better though that would be, that it will solve the scale of the problem here? Previously, when we discussed this on the programme, we suggest that actually maybe the whole question of Fortress Europe should now be reviewed.
I think it should be reviewed. I think you're right. I mean, no, it can't solve the problem. And what Frontex are doing within their limited resources, I'm sure they're doing as much as they possibly can. But that's the point, where the political will to continue the search and rescue wasn't there. That's why it was stopped. Because of this Fortress Europe ideology, this pull factor ideology, we do not want people coming into these borders. And that absolutely must be reviewed because we are facing a humanitarian crisis. It's a global crisis, and we cannot sit there pretending this is not happening and pretending if we close our borders and prevent people coming here, people will stop because desperate people will take desperate measures. If you're prepared to risk your life at sea, it's because the alternative for you and your children is just as bad. You are prepared to take that risk in hope that you might be saved, you might get sanctuary in Europe. So, of course, we need to revisit it. But can I pick up on a point you made, John? You said if we close legal channels, and that's what we've done. The UNHCR asked Europe to take 130,000 Syrian refugees last year. The UK has taken 143. I mean, Germany took about 30,000. 5,000 more from Spain, and the rest of the other 26 member states took just over 5,000. Look at the amount of people we have legally taken in. And 143 for the United Kingdom is actually abysmal.
I mean, Eva, that would be a part of the problem, because I'm sure, I understand what you're saying about the resources you've got, but you've been handed a job that you can't do with resources that won't achieve what you'd like to do, haven't you?
Well, let's not forget what is the mandate of the agency. The agency is a border control agency. The agency was created to support member states at their external borders because we have Schengen in most of Europe, and there should be solidarity when it comes to migratory flows at the external borders. However, the agency is conducting search and rescue because it's our obligation. It's our obligation. Our human obligation, and that's what the law of the sea says, and that's the first priority, always. However, we are we were created for a different purpose, and in Europe, there isn't a European search and rescue regime. Search and rescue is governed through the national search and rescue coordination centers, which are responsible for the national search and rescue areas, and is governed by international law, by the law of the sea.
So we're in the middle of an election campaign in this country. Immigration is one of the big issues in that campaign. There's an incident here which has brought it home, I think, probably to millions of people watching their television sets, exactly what this migration policy means, in a way that perhaps they wouldn't have been able to exactly picture it before that. Do you think it'll alter the way politicians in this country deal with the issue?
It's a very interesting question. I don't know if it will make an immediate change in the way immigration policy is debated or conducted or proposed. We're very close to a general election, but what I hope this will highlight is that we really do need to rethink our immigration policy. And part and parcel of that is the fact that when we categorise and we dehumanize, so when people are a category, those immigrants, those migrants that aren't our problem, then we actually lose our humanity. And what happens is we stop thinking of people as real human beings. And so it's very easy to implement policies that actually are harmful. And this is one example of that. this is not our problem. This is happening somewhere else. We want to control our borders. We don't want more immigrants, and therefore we turn a blind eye. We pull funding away and look at what's happening. Look at the tragedy we're seeing. We have to hold ourselves responsible for that to some extent, and we have to really rethink how we perceive migrants, and that migrants are fellow human beings, and we live in a global world with a global crisis raging. We've got to play our part, and we've got to stop looking inward all the time and building these walls.
Do you think if it might be a longer haul to have an impact on the establishment political spectrum, do you think it's beginning to have an impact on how ordinary people see this? There's been a kind of politician's assumption that you have to say these things about migration, but when something like this happens, it dramatises what it really means for millions of people. Do you think the public mood may change a little bit because of this?
That's right. I really hope it will. And, you know, it's interesting what you say, that when the public mood we really feel coming from JCWI and the work we have been doing over the last few years, specifically on this issue, we have seen a real change in public sentiment. The British public is a little bit sick and tired of the negative rhetoric and the constant scapegoating of immigrants. In fact, we have launched a poster campaign in the run-up to this general election called I Am an Immigrant. And it's to reclaim the word immigrant, that being an immigrant has been, well, it's been a dirty word, the way it's been used in our politics. And what's interesting is that we crowdfunded for that poster campaign, which is nationwide around the country. I hope you've seen the posters. In 3 weeks, the British public raised £54,000 for it. And the comments that have been left show the change of mood. You know, the debate has been polarised for very long, and now you can see a shift in public opinion, and I hope, therefore, a shift in our politics on immigration. So I really hope that our campaign is a positive one that might shift things, but I hope this tragedy, as tragic as it is, has a silver lining in that it does change the debate on immigration.
OK, Saira Grant from the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants and Eva Moncur from Frontex, thanks very much. But I'm afraid we'll have to leave the discussion there, although we will be back after the break with the rest of today's news and also what you've been saying on Twitter. That's after this break.